In this video, we'll focus on the demand curve. In particular, we'll focus on three main things. What is a demand curve and how it's drawn, the relationship between price and quantity demand, and a very important concept, the difference between a move along and a shift. We'll then do a summary at the end. Before we have a look at how that demand curve is drawn, we need to understand the relationship between price and quantity demanded. We can think of quantity demanded in the form of consumption of goods and services. So let's say, for example, the price of a product increases. Naturally, what happens to our consumption level? It should decrease. And when the price of a product decreases, then the quantity demanded should naturally increase. The relationship between price and quantity demanded is negative. And how we can identify that it's a negative relationship is when the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. So the signs are in the opposite direction. If you look at the bottom one, you see that the price decreased and the quantity increased. So whenever that happens, we know that we have a negative relationship, or they normally call it an inverse or indirect relationship between price and quantity demanded. This now is a very famous rule which is called the law of demand. And this law of demand just basically states that when the price of a particular product increases, quantity demanded should naturally decrease. So we can understand it as the law of demand. Now that we understand that when prices increase and quantity demanded decreases, we can now show this on the graph. So how does the demand graph look? Demand is always downward sloping. You'll understand this as we put in the values for that. But what we have on the left-hand side or on the y-axis, we've got price. And on the x-axis, we've got quantity demanded. So quantity demanded. So we can say it's QD. Here we start off at a particular price for a product and a particular quantity that's being consumed. Let's now add, for example, a 20 Rand for the cost of the product, and you're consuming 20 units of that particular product. Here we have our demand curve, and we can call this point A. Let's suppose that the price increases. So if the price increases, it moves upwards. So we have a price increase from 20 to 30 Rand. That's P1. Increasing should show that quantity demanded is decreasing, and that's basically what shows here. So we're moving to Q1, which means, let's say, for example, we're consuming now only 10 units of that product, and this decrease in demand or quantity demanded is shown by the movement from Q0 to Q1. Now that we understand the relationship between price and quantity demanded, we can try and understand what the difference between a move along and a shift of the curve is. We'll start off with what a move along is. And if you look at this graph, we see that the movement happens between point A, which is your starting point, and it moves all the way to point B. Staying on the demand curve, we moved from point A all the way to point B. This relationship here is called a move along. And how you can understand this is that a move along only takes place when the price increases or price decreases. In this case, it moved along the demand curve because price increased from 20 Rand to 30 Rand. You can see there. And this caused a move along from point A to point B. Let's try and understand this with a price decrease. We know that when prices decrease, quantity demanded increases. Again, you have the demand curve, which is downward sloping as depicted in the picture. And we've got price, that's on the y-axis, and quantity demand on the x-axis. So here again, we can say that a starting point at P0 and Q0, which is point A. Here we assume that we're starting off at 20 Rand and we're consuming 20 units of that particular product. Let's assume now that the price decreased. So the price decreased from 20 Rand to, let's say, 15 Rand. to P1, that's our 0, and our quantity demand should increase. Does it increase? Yes, it does, to let's say 25. So when price decreased, quantity demanded increased. And here again, we have a movement from point A to point B. That is shown as a movement from point A all the way to point B, causing a move along in the curve. And as we know now, that the only thing that causes a move along is the price. So moving from point A to point B shows a move along the curve, because when we decrease our price from 20 Rand to 15 Rand, we increase our quantity demanded from Q0 to Q1. Now that you understand what a move along is, let's show this on a table. So let's say, for example, we've got prices, P, and quantity demand. We're just going to insert any values here. So let's say, for example, the product price is 20 Rand, and it increases from 20 to 25 to 30, 35 to 40. What should happen to quantity demanded? As we know, of the law of demand states that as the price increases, quantity demanded should decrease. So let's say we're consuming 20 units, but as the price increases, our quantity demanded gets smaller or decreases to 15. At price 30, we're consuming 10 units, 35 drops to 5 units, and at 40 Rand, we'll consume no product because it becomes too expensive. Now that you understand how the demand curve is drawn, what to put on your axes when you're drawing your demand curve, we can now move on to the last concept, which is the shift of the curve. So how does the demand curve shift? It either shifts to the right-hand side or to the left-hand side. If the demand curve shifts to the right-hand side, we can say that there's an increase in demand. And when demand shifts to the left, we can say that there's a decrease in demand. So a quick trick to help you understand how the demand curve shifts to the right and to the left, take your right hand and place it over the demand curve in a straight line, and let's shift it to the right hand side. So move your hand to the right hand side, and you should have shown that your demand curve moves to the right. So that will show an increase or rightward shift of the demand curve from, let's say, D0 to D1. And now how do we show a shift in the demand curve to the left? Again, taking a right hand and placing it over the demand curve, we're now going to shift your demand curve to the left. So it looks something like that, where demand decreases or shifts to the left-hand side. Now that you've seen how the demand curve shifts to the right and to the left-hand side, we need to understand what actually causes those shifts and how does it differ to a move along. In a nutshell, a shift of the curve takes place when demand increases for that product at a particular price. So for example, if your income increases and you really like that particular product, the price does not have to decrease in order for you to demand more. Because you've got an increase or you've got the income to purchase that particular product at that particular price, you would consume that particular product. On the left-hand side, we see that there's different determinants of demand, or this we can call the shifters of demand. So these 4 factors below all cause the demand curve to either increase, shift to the right, or to decrease, shift to the left. Let's, for example, do an increase in demand or shift the demand curve to the right-hand side. So first of all, we take our right hand, we place it over the demand curve, and we shift it to the right-hand side. So that's what it would look like. At that particular price, demand should increase, causing an increase in quantity demanded as well. So Q0 moving all the way to Q1 and showing an increase or shift to the right where demand increases. Now, let's have a look at the different factors. The first one is pretty simple. When our income increases, you agree that our demand for that particular product will increase. The second factor that shifts your demand curve is tastes or preferences. Let's say, for example, this graph is an iPhone graph. For example, you only consume an iPhone because you like the way the product looks, feels, and operates. You will be willing to buy that product at the price that it's at the shops. So for example, If your taste or preference for the new iPhone increases, that means your demand for that particular product will increase, showing an increase in demand from D0 to D1, causing a shift. And now we're shifting from point A to point B. The same thing happens with population expansion. Let's say, for example, there's an increase in birth rates in a particular country. Those people need to consume goods like food and services in the economy. So if the population increases, then naturally the demand will also increase. You see that it doesn't depend on whether the price increases or decreases. It will just shift your demand curve to the right-hand side. The last one is a little bit tricky, but what you can understand from here is that when the expected price, so let's say, for example, we expect the price of a particular product to increase in the future, then what's going to happen to consumption now or quantity demand? It should naturally increase because we always want to buy the product at a cheaper price. So let's say, for example, the expected price in the future is going to increase. That means that current demand or demand today will also increase, causing a shift in the demand curve from D0 to D1. So what I've shown you here is that they have different factors or shifters of demand, which is your income, tastes, or preferences, your population expansion, and your expected price. When all of these behave in a certain way, it has the same effect on demand, where it shows that your demand curve increases from D0 to D1. There is a fifth shifter or factor of demand, which I didn't add in here because I'll do it in a subsequent video. And that is the price of related goods, which take into account substitute goods and complementary goods. Now that we understand what happens when the demand increases or demand curve shifts to the right, let's try and understand when the demand curve shifts to the left. So using the factors or the shifters of demand on the left-hand side, we can now take our right hand, place it over the demand curve, and shift the demand curve to the left-hand side. So it should look something like that, where your demand curve shifts from D0 to D1 at the same price level of P0. Quantity demanded changes from Q0 to Q1, showing a leftward shift in the demand curve from point A to point B. Let's assume that your income decreases. Naturally, our demand for that particular product or for a product will decrease because we don't have the income anymore to purchase that particular product. And there again, it doesn't matter what the price is, because our income decreased, our demand will naturally decrease. The second determinant of demand, which would be taste and preferences, which, let's say, for example, we have the iPhone now again. Now, let's say, for example, you don't like the iPhone anymore and you prefer another brand. So your taste or your preference for that particular product will decrease, causing you to decrease your demand. Point number three, or determinant number three, population expansion. So let's say, for example, a virus comes out and wipes out half of our population. That means that population won't go through an expansion anymore, but population decreases, causing a decrease in demand because there's that many less people demanding food, clothes, and any other product in the economy. The fourth determinant of demand is expected price. Let's say, for example, the expected price is going to decrease in the future. So the price of particular products will decrease in the future. What's going to happen to demand today? Because we know that the price is going to decrease in the future, our demand for that particular product will decrease now. So now I've shown you that the demand will decrease for all of these cases here, where demand decreases because of something happening. For example, the income decreasing, demand will decrease, causing your demand curve to shift to the left-hand side. Expected prices also decreasing, causing a decrease in demand. This now basically summarizes what happens when there's an increase and there's a decrease in demand. Shifting your demand curve to the right or to your left basically allows us to show whatever happens in our determinants of demand on the demand curve. So let's summarize what we've learned so far in this chapter. We know that when prices increase, quantity demanded decreases. And when prices decrease, quantity demanded increases. This is the law of demand. The second thing we learned was how to draw the demand curve. The demand curve has the y-axis, which contains price, and quantity demanded on the x-axis. The demand curve is shown here as downward sloping, which has a particular price of P0 and quantity 0. The third thing we learned was the difference between a move along and a shift of the curve. The move along only takes place when there's a change in price. So when prices increase or price decreases on quantity demand. So when prices increase, quantity demanded decreases, and prices decrease, quantity demanded increases. And this is only shown as a move along the demand curve, shown here below as the movement from point A to point B. And that only takes place when the product either becomes cheaper or the product becomes more expensive, and how people react with regard to consumption or quantity demanded. Dealing with a shift in demand, shifting to the right or to the left-hand side in the previous slides, we know that it can only be shifted by 5 determinants of demand. Either increasing to the right-hand side from D to D1, taking a right hand and shifting it to the right-hand side, where there's an increase in demand, or showing a decrease in demand, taking a right hand and shifting to the left-hand side from D0 to D1, causing a decrease in demand.